So, you're the shopping cart? They're trying to sell you? No, you borrow shopping carts, you don't buy them. I spoke into my phone. I'm on loan, pay attention. My sister laughed. The job I had applied for and subsequently been hired for was a bit convoluted, so I'd gone for a metaphor. The inventor of the shopping cart, a man named Sylvan Goldman, who you won't be surprised ended up a millionaire, had trouble with his creation at first. People didn't like the idea of switching from baskets. Mostly it was thought to be like a baby carriage, which macho men believed was effeminate, and women were irritated at being subjected to, having already pushed plenty of baby carriages around, thanks very much. So Goldman hired people to walk around the store with the carts to normalise their use. And damned if it didn't work. This is where I became a shopping cart. The newest addition to the Galactic Federation, the Trittilu from their planet Arkinsla, was the worst first contact situation in the galaxy's history. First, they were half the height of a typical sovereign species, though fairly stocky. For various reasons that I learned in school and mostly forgotten, the shortest Federation members averaged 5 feet tall, and the tallest averaged 8. Whether they were comparable to humans or octopuses or dogs or even plants, it was apparently most practical to evolve at that range. Some planetary quirks resulted in Trittilu citizens, and many of their other planet species, averaging 3 feet tall. They were purple, not an uncommon colour from those who evolved to blend in with vegetation or hunt at night, and had 3 toes in each foot and 3 fingers in each hand. They were introduced to the galaxy and, at their height, found themselves a little intimidated and a lot overwhelmed. Not to mention inconvenienced. But they got on with things, meeting with various other species and sending representatives to the Galactic Council. Unfortunately, that just set the stage for what came next. The Trittilu had the strange characteristic of smelling like some sort of cooking herb. It wasn't anything we could identify as similar. No one came out of a meeting and went, "I got it, cumin. They smell like cumin." It was just oddly appealing to all species. It seemed as if this was a sort of camouflage that they developed, living on a planet covered in vegetation. I'm not sure who broke it to them. That must have been a weird conversation, but then it got worse. Someone out there wondered if they tasted as good as they smelled, and it turned out they tasted even better. Several transport ships went missing over time, never to be found. It turned out to be a black market run by a species that had been rejected from the Federation, limited to their own solar system. Of course, the most practical thing to do next was to synthetically create the meat. It would have been ridiculous to try to sell it to the entire galaxy by abducting a dozen here or there, and artificial meat production had been streamlined centuries ago. And artificially create it they did, by the ton. Genuine Trittilu meat from a citizen was still next level special, though, for those who love to spend more money on exactly the same thing, and abductions were still happening. In the end, the market ended up mostly being outside of species, though even many of them cringed at the idea. And these were folks who'd been rejected because of their casual view of war crimes. Of the many species in the Federation, not many had been discovered to have been purchasing it, and from them, only those who were both extremely wealthy and lacking in morals. The vast majority of us went, "What the fuck?" Galaxy-wide condemnation crashed through screens of all species. And yet, to put myself in their shoes, I understood the fact that we were horrified was of small comfort to their species. I couldn't imagine going out into space with some job as an engineer with a little voice in the back of my head saying, "Sure, they say they won't eat you, but that's what they said the first time." There were now a significant amount of Trittilu citizens, mostly in interplanetary jobs that knew humans, had other friends in the Federation, or even went off-world on occasion. After the majority of the labs producing the meat was shut down, everyone knew we couldn't eliminate them all. Plenty of people went to prison. Not to mention, we told the Trittilu, "Hey, here are your new weapons for defense and offense. They work great for us. Anyone tries to eat you, blow them up with a force that will disintegrate them into atoms. That helped. But the damage had been done. To them, aliens had gone from wonders to potential evils, and there was no going back to make a better first impression. This is where humanity came in. Diplomacy was where we shined, and it made us queasy, literally in some cases, to think of the Trittilu being plagued by this curse of nature for the rest of time. They themselves were going so far as to study the possibility of gene tweaking to make themselves not so tasty, though that was an ambitious project to say the least. We humans decided we couldn't just sit by, so along with a few other species we decided to offer friendship, at the most basic level. A worldwide hiring posting went up online, looking for candidates to move to Arkinsula and just exist. Some other species were attempting the same thing. It was going to be done in moderation, of course, and the locations were limited. There were 3 human embassies on their planet, and within about 20 miles of those cities were the only approved locations for immigrants from other species. The delightful part of this had been the job posting. Firstly, the cut-off height was 5'2". I was a solid 5 foot, so that wasn't an issue. But they were looking for friendly introverts, to which many people just sounded like sociable hermits. There was no solid line for personality in humans. However, as we all knew quite well, and people like me fit the bill, I preferred a few hours of social interaction a day working from home. I could love that interaction if it was with people I enjoyed hanging out with, but then I went home to curl up on the couch with a cup of tea and the latest episode of my favourite Earth serials. This was a qualification because we knew we were going to be ostracised. They weren't exactly expecting violent retaliation from our neighbours, but we guessed that most of those we met would go out of their way to avoid us. We would have our own house on a typical street, with a nice backyard, and we would spend most of our time there. Interaction was planned. Once a month, all new transplants would meet at the human embassy for dinner, and many of us became friends online for rare occasions when we desired company. But Trittilu were expected to treat us like we might just be biding our time. To be fair, it wasn't that bad. It was more like I was always given a wide berth, a skeptical, wary look, and or ignored. Maybe like a bee that had gotten into your home. Worried about confronting it, you would just hope it went back out the same window it came in and not cause you any pain. The first day, when a truck brought all my belongings into the house built to human specifications, there were locals staring at me out their windows. Even one, I am pretty sure it was a child, with binoculars. I met several of the local police officers at their precinct, bussed in with the other immigrants, and accompanied by a Trittilu diplomat of some standing. There, we were seated in a large room, in chairs slightly too small, and the police captain and a few others gave some speeches. But yes, I could tell many of them were wary of us also. That natural fear could have been worsened by the fact that we'd all been packed in together in one room. Whose idea was that? Even if the speeches were a bit more gesture rather than given in earnest, I appreciated them. They thanked us for our participation. They told us that a campaign had been going on for a while now on Galnet, and their local advertisements, encouraging progress with species that had reacted with proper revulsion and never taken part in the barbarity. It's just that we were now unknowns and no longer given the benefit of the doubt. Public opinion had been swayed, so that there wasn't any genuine fear of invasion. But I did notice the captain didn't mention any percentages of public opinion, or to what degree they had been swayed. I wasn't sure what to expect. I figured I would be left alone, and in that, I was completely accurate. Every morning I would get up, make a cup of tea, and have it on the front porch. Their climate was a bit warm, but my morning cup of hot tea was mandatory, and it was lovely sitting outside. I mentioned their planet was heavy with vegetation, and that was even the case in the suburbs, or their closest neighborhood equivalent. Vines with budding flowers climbed up trees and fences. Moss was the standard across all lawns, and chubby, leafy trees were everywhere. A tinge of humidity was in the air for months at a time, and I'd been told that was their spring. According to the booklet of information I'd received, though, the weather didn't vary too much, so even the coldest and hottest days of the year wouldn't be horrible. It was lovely sitting out there and breathing the fresh air, like I had a forest in my front yard. I hope that, given time, many more humans would be able to visit and enjoy the gorgeous planet. My day consisted mostly of work, graphic design that I did for clients back on Earth, a fully flexible schedule. Occasionally, I would pull out my tablet and read a book, usually on the comfy pillow chair on my front porch. I had breakfast, lunch, and dinner all cooked myself. It would have been wonderful to go into town for a meal now and then, but I knew that would probably be pushing my luck. Every week I went to the local grocery store, and after a month most of the folks there didn't stare too much at my presence. But interacting on a more personal level at a restaurant was something else. Also, I imagined as soon as they saw me enter, the manager would program the AI hostess to say, "Sorry, Trittilu isn't on the menu," and then ignore me until I left on my own. The first month went without too much trouble. The human meet-up at the embassy let us gossip a bit. Apparently, a few calls had been made to the police whenever we'd been seen somewhere the citizen had deemed suspicious, or they suspected we were up to something shady. 2 officers always followed up, inevitably ending up chatting for a few minutes before leaving. What things the humans had allegedly been doing, they were never told. Then there was some minor vandalism, typical of teenagers with more bravery than sense. Uprooting many of the plants in someone's yard, for those who had been working to keep it looking nice as I had, or painting "Go Home" across a wall. The extent of the vegetation actually became a source of a hobby for me. I never had a yard to care for before, and I started learning about everything in my front and backyard. The majority were native plants, but there were also some that had been planted by the people who had built my house that needed maintenance. I started watching a gardening channel show in the evenings, and brought a few books. Those that lived in the neighbourhood went about their business, of course. They would often stare, curiously or worriedly, but they had things to do. Children to care for, errands to run, work to finish. The human that did the same things every day wasn't of much interest after a while. I guess that they'd often look at me to establish what I was doing, just for knowledge's sake, and then move on. It was a strange sensation, sitting on the porch and knowing someone might be watching, bordering on feeling like a zoo animal. But as time passed, it became normal, and eventually I didn't pay the fact much mind. After those first few days, I'd easily memorize regular comings and goings, including when children left for school and came home. One day, I was trimming a plant that stood in front of my porch, a variety of tall bush. It bloomed half the year, and needed pruning occasionally during the off-season. Hurried footsteps echoed down the street from a handful of children, but since children were often in a hurry, it didn't draw my attention until one of them yelled, "Hey! Get back here, you turd!" Turning to check out what was going on, I was shocked to see a Trittilu child, having been running from 3 others, sprint into my yard and come to a stumbling stop a few yards away from me, near my porch. He looked at me, wide-eyed, then back to the others, who had stopped at the edge of my property line, then back to me. After a brief hesitation, I tossed the shears away from me, to my left, landing with a thump on the mossy ground. "What's going on?" I demanded. There was silence for a long moment before one of the 3 kids let out a huff. "We're just playing." "Oh, so you think that because I'm from another planet, I'm an idiot, huh?" I asked, cocking my head. Something about the boy's stance made me think he wanted to say some exceedingly rude things, perhaps about my heritage. Even aliens insulted each other's mothers. But he set off at glaring at the child who'd taken refuge on my lawn, and led the other 2 off to make trouble elsewhere. Glancing at the boy, I took in his appearance. His breathing had started to slow, but he was still tense, staring at me warily. "You okay?" Hesitating, he bobbed his head. "Does that happen often?" Another hesitation, then he shrugged. "I mean, you must have been scared to come to me for safety. No one even talks to me. Do your parents know about this?" It's not a big deal, he told me, moving his weight from one foot to another. I'm sorry I trespassed. Don't be silly, I told him with a comforting smile. Adults are supposed to look after kids. It's the same with my species. Feel free to take shelter here whenever you need to. But you didn't answer my question. Do your parents know you're being bullied? Sort of. Pausing thoughtfully, I let out a breath. All right, could you do me a favor and tell them everything that happened just now? Relaying this story would likely alert the parents that he was worried about real injury from those little assholes. Otherwise, he would have kept running instead of risking an encounter with the strange alien. It meant he was more scared of them than of me, which objectively was a good thing for me. But the situation in its entirety warranted attention. Okay, he finally said. Promise? Yeah. I nodded. I'm Marilena. Nice to meet you. You too, he replied automatically. I'm Promito. At that, he gave a wave. They moved their hands up and down rather than side to side like humans, and it was still slightly comical, and went on his way. After finishing up the pruning, I went over to my porch and picked up my small basket. One of the smaller bushes in my yard bore fruit, something that was small and orange but tasted almost like strawberries. I figured out that not only could you have them with breakfast, but like earth fruits, they could be used in all sorts of recipes. You could make something healthy or bake something with a generous amount of sugar, and you had a fantastic dessert. I picked up a few dozen by the time I heard someone behind me say, excuse me? I turned around to see a male Trittilu on the edge of my property. Hi, I said with a small smile, standing a bit taller. Hello, my son just visited you. Right, Promito. So he told you about being chased? Yes, I wanted to say thank you for when he just ran over to you. Of course, don't worry about it, I assured him. I'm just glad he's okay. I never had a big problem being bullied when I was younger, but I know how kids can be. Do the schools here take it seriously? They do. Good. I paused. Would you like some grittil? I asked, holding out the basket. Oh, we have our own bush, but thank you, he replied. Ah, okay. Silence again. Anything else? He looked thoughtful but shook his head. No, that's it. Thank you again. You're welcome. He glanced around my yard before turning to leave, then turning back. We live in house 183. I'm Harineko. Marilena, I said, raising my hand and smiling. With that, he left, walking back to his home. Still smiling, I resumed gathering the little fruits and piling them into my basket.